Hey everybody, it is Dak here from the Ed Boys, and today we're talking about the Wildy boss update. Callisto, Venenatis, and Venenatis each recently got a much needed update, including new drops, a new cave location, and even weaker singles-only versions of the bosses. This video won't be a guide on how to kill these bosses, rather a discussion video on the good and the bad parts of the update. I will be making guides for the updated bosses soon though. If you have been enjoying the videos, or at least getting some useful information out of them, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, as it does really help out the channel. Also, I do stream on Twitch, so if you're looking for even more content, be sure to follow me on the Twitch side of things, which should be linked on the screen and in the description. Let's start by breaking down the update and talk about what they changed with the bosses. These guys used to be a lot more boring in general. They were located just out in the wilderness, kind of out in the open with their dedicated areas, and just able to roam around a little bit. You could run in from any direction, just find the boss, and proceed to get obliterated by them. All three of these bosses were very strong, and they're difficult to kill unless you use some very buggy safe spots. Ironically, these safe spots ended up balancing out the bosses a little bit. You did not have to use a lot of supplies per kill, so you could kill more than like one or two in a trip and then have supplies left over if PKers showed up. The money per hour did add up fairly well from the grind perspective, but overall, it was just a boring grind that really needed an update. But we're here to talk about what they changed, not how it used to be. First of all, the bosses aren't just roaming out in their spot in the wilderness. Not that they had a massive roam area, but they actually placed them in some caves instead, which doesn't seem like a huge deal on paper, but it does affect the fight quite a lot. To enter the caves, it does cost a 50k fee, but not every time you enter. I thought at first that it was going to be 50k per trip, but that is not the case. You're going to spend 50k to get into the caves, which can be taken from your bank, and then you don't need to pay that fee again until you get killed by either the boss or a PKer. This means that you can take a full trip, bank for more supplies, go back out to the caves, and you won't need to spend another 50k. It's only once you are killed. Also, when you get a kill on the boss, it decreases your next fee by 10k. So if you get 5 kills before you die, then your next fee is 0 coins. Eventually, you really do just forget about this fee altogether. It is worth noting, if you kill one of these bosses with multiple players, only the player who deals the most damage is going to get 10k reduced from their next fee. When you arrive at one of these caves, you can right click and peek into the cave to see if anybody's fighting, but this does require at least 20k seeing that boss, which is not really helpful when you're trying to start the grind. Once you do unlock that peek option, it's easy to find a world by just hopping like outside the caves, as opposed to it used to be like you had to run into the fight a little bit and hopefully see if anybody was killing the boss in like the buggy save spot, then go to hop. Also, when you are in the caves fighting the boss already, it's a lot easier to see somebody else showing up to the fight. So when you were already in the fight and somebody could show up from any direction, you were really just like staring at the minimap hoping for no white dots. It's much more linear entry to the fight, makes it a lot easier to tell if somebody's there, including if they're skulled or not. It doesn't necessarily mean you're guaranteed to get out of there, because there's also like only one exit, and the exit does work a little differently. When you exit from the fight, you don't go back outside the caves where you just came from. Instead, you'll be sent to the escape caves. You end up at a random exit where you left the boss, so if you leave Callisto's cave, you're not always right outside Callisto's cave in the escape caves. The more you break down the escape caves, the more complicated they sound, honestly. So I'm not really trying to dive into it too hard. When you leave the boss lair, you're sent to like a random spot in the escape caves, and from there you need to run to an exit, which there are 4 of them. These exits will take you out to the actual wilderness where you can run far away to teleport out to safety. There are monsters in the escape caves, and PKers can follow you, so it can be a little bit hectic, but honestly you spend very little time inside the caves for the most part, so we can go ahead and move on. We talked about entering the fight and exiting the fight, but what about fighting the fight? Again, this is not going to be a guide for each boss, so I'm sorry if I don't break down the mechanics quite enough. I will be making guides for each boss that'll discuss like how to make very solid cash here and how to actually kill the bosses rather than just talk about the update. If I had one word to explain the fight itself compared to the old fights, it would be engaging. Like, you actually fight the bosses now. It's incredible. It really is. You could fight the old bosses without those buggy safe spots, but they did too much damage to be viable. Now you actually fight them instead of getting them stuck, and you don't take a lot of damage for it. It's not always a bad thing if the boss does damage, but for a Wildy boss, it is really crap to use all your supplies on the boss kills, and then a PKer shows up, you got no supplies, you only got 1 kill anyway, sucks to suck. Even if no PKers show up and you only get 1 or 2 kills in a trip, that's pretty crappy, but it's really not the case when you fight the Wildy bosses now. I guess if you really mess up the fight, you can take too much damage, but it's not unavoidable damage anymore. There are also 2 versions of each boss now. They each share like a collection log space, so you may have noticed that you have Callisto and Artio, Venenatis and Spindle, and then Vetti and Calvarion. Artio, Spindle, and Varian are weaker versions of the boss that reside in their own caves, which are all just north of the Ferox Enclave. These caves are singles plus instead of multi-combat, so in other words, you'll only ever be attacked by one person at a time. If you fight the big bosses, it's always multi-combat. You're very likely to get attacked by a clan of people. It's much more appetizing for individual players instead of teams to use the singles plus. Singles plus does mean that a PKer can attack you while you're fighting the boss. It's not completely singles combat. If a PKer drops in there, you do want to bounce right away. That's a lot easier to do because these singles plus bosses are also lower level wilderness, so you can Royal Seed Pod to get out of there before the PKer has a chance to teleblock you. Overall, the singles plus bosses are much less risky, and they're easier to kill, which can help with lower level players too, but that also comes with a lot worse loot. It's all the same drops as the big bosses, just lower quantities of the regular drops, and then a little bit more rare for the uniques. It's really not that bad to be able to pull a unique from the little boss. They are pretty well balanced to where you still make decent money, just less risk. It's also worth noting you do not get sent to the escape caves when you leave the singles boss's area. You just get sent right outside the cave that you came in. So speaking of uniques, they added a couple drops to each boss. First of all, each of the wilderness weapons from Revenants have been upgraded. The crossbow can be upgraded to the Web Weaver bow by using the Fangs of Venenatis. Fangs of Venenatis are currently just under 10 mil at the moment. The Vigor's Chain Mace can be upgraded to an Ursine Chain Mace by using the Claws of Callisto. These claws are also sitting at right about 10 mil at the moment. And then finally, you can upgrade the Thameron Scepter into an Accursed Scepter by using the Skull of Vedian. The Scepter is not as helpful as the other two weapons, so the Skull of Vedian is more like a 1 mil drop, but it's still a nice bonus. These 3 drops were added to their respective bosses at a 1 in 196 drop rate, which makes them the most common unique that you can get from Vedian, Callisto, and Venenatis. If you're fighting the little ones, Calvarion, Artio, Spindle, you're going to find that the Dragon Two-Hand and the Dragon Pickaxe are more common than the weapon upgrades. The Web Weaver Bow is best in slot for Callisto and Artio, and then the Ursine Chain Mace is best in slot for Vedian Calvarion and Venenatis Spindle. The Ursine Chain Mace is kind of insane. It's very fun to use against Vedian. In general, these weapon upgrades have added some pretty solid cash to bosses that already made some pretty solid cash. But that's not all they added to the drop table. Meet the Void Waker. If you played RS3, even in the RS2 days, you might recognize the Karasi's sword. That's what the Void Waker is. It's pretty much a Karasi. This weapon has a special attack, which is fairly unique. It's dealing magic damage based off of your melee max hit, but up to like 150% of your melee max hit. Also 50% minimum. Like, it hits very hard. It only requires 50% spec energy, so you can dump a lot of damage in a short period of time, which is very good for PvP. The weapon excels in some PvM situations too, though, like the Nightmare or God Wars dungeon bosses, including Nex. The Void Waker is a very sick weapon, which means currently it's very expensive. The Void Waker is made up of 3 pieces: the Void Waker Blade, which is dropped by Vedian and Calvarion, the Void Waker Gem, which is dropped by Venenatis and Spindle, and the Void Waker Hilt, which is dropped by Callisto and Artio. The Blade and the Gem are both sitting at 60 mil at the moment, and then the Void Waker Hilt is sitting just under 100 mil. They're not extremely rare either. If you're fighting the big bosses, like Callisto for example, the Void Waker Hilt is more common than a Tyrannical Ring. A 1 in 360 chance for a 97 mil drop is actually pretty nuts, because again, these bosses already had good drop tables before they added these new weapons. That's basically the full breakdown for what they changed from the Wilderness bosses. Let's go ahead and talk about whether or not we like the update now. I'll start with the pros, the good things, because for the most part, I am very happy with the update. I think the basic design of the caves is definitely an upgrade from just slapping them out into the Wilderness and calling it a day. It's very linear for finding the boss and being able to tell if somebody showed up to the boss while you're fighting it. The escape caves give a little bit more flavor than usual for trying to get away, but in general, if it's like you versus a clan, it might be the end of the road for you. The fight is way more fun. You actually engage with these bosses and actually have to do something instead of just get them into the safe spot and just sit there AFK. You can get pretty long trips without using all of your supplies, giving yourself more potential to escape if you see a PKer. Plus, separating them into 2 different bosses was a good balance for the fight. You still have the multi-combat boss with very good drops, so you can show up with a team for good kills, but PKers also could show up with a team for good kills, so it's a little sketchy. And then you have the singles plus combat, which is a lot less risky, and it does give players a chance to at least try out the bosses and maybe get some expensive drops. And speaking of expensive drops, they added to the loot table. These bosses already added up to a couple mil GP an hour before the update, but now with the weapon upgrade and the Void Waker pieces, you can peak out at a lot more money. I did a ton of Venenatis KC while trying to get the Venenatis pet, and overall made a lot of cash from it. This was before this update, by the way. At the time, the Dragon Pickaxe ranged from 5 mil to 6 mil a piece, and that was the most expensive drop. The Fangs of Venenatis are twice as much money as that, and they're more common than the D pick. That drop alone, that one upgrade to the drop table, would have made me so much more money during the grind. And then there's the Void Waker gem, which is like 60 mil, and really not that rare. It's less rare than a ring. I'm not trying to complain about the lack of money that it seems I have made now that I did the grind years ago. I'm still very happy with the money that I made on that grind. That's how impressed I am with the new drop table, I'm telling you. They made a very solid update with the GP an hour you can get while you're here. So the cave design, the fight design, and the upgrade to the loot table are all very good thumbs up. It really doesn't leave that much left for the negatives here. First of all, before I complain about PKers, the fact that you need 20 KC on a boss before you can even peek into the cave is actually a pretty bad mechanic. It gives some incentive to get more KC, giving you direct benefits for grinding the boss. That part alone makes sense, but it really just makes the boss more of a pain in the ass during your first 20 KC, which is usually when you're trying to learn the boss and like get into it. It's not really a good time to be a pain in the ass. It should be more motivating during your first few kills so that you really get into the boss. Also, even if you've completed your 20 KC, it is fairly common to be fighting the boss and somebody else who wants to get kills comes barging in because they don't have 20 KC and they can't peek into the room to see if you're even there, effectively punishing players who already completed the KC as well. I think the idea of giving benefits to players that have completed more kills is a good thing, but the peak option here really isn't the best. It's not a huge deal either. Realistically, there's one thing that gets in the way of these Wildy bosses being absolutely broken, and that's the fact that you're in the wilderness and you can get PK'd. I kind of baited it a minute ago. I'm really not here to complain about PKers, as they are part of the balance of these bosses. First of all, it is annoying to get PK'd. No matter how much you're risking, it just slows down the grind at the very least. It makes every time it happens, it's annoying. If you don't bring a big risk into the wilderness, then getting PK'd occasionally is not very detrimental to your overall profit. The regular drops from these bosses make up for ether and black d'hide and stuff, no problem. I usually bring 250 to 400k risk depending on how many charges are in my weapon, and the main thing about getting PK'd really is just that it's annoying. It's not fun to get killed by somebody else while grinding, but in reality it is balanced while out there. Getting PK'd is not a guarantee. Keeping your eyes out, maybe using an alt to scout the cave entrance, teleporting out quick enough to not get tele-blocked. Even after you get tele-blocked, you can escape. I've been PK'd many times, but I've also had some really wild escapes from PKers, which actually ends up being the highlight of the night. Suddenly, because you got away from the PKers, it's more fun that they were there. It's kind of ironic. But if the idea of potentially getting PK'd just pisses you off too much, then also you don't have to fight these bosses. At least not every boss in the game is that way. And especially with the Dragon Pickaxe being moved to other drop tables, the main reason you'd want to be out here is the good money you could get, which you can make good money elsewhere, or maybe these pets if you really like the pets. The PKer aspect of Wildy bosses is the most daunting part of trying the grind out if you've never done it before, but the more kills that you get on these bosses, the less you're going to be worried about losing your gear. Just don't risk a lot of money, and when you do get PK'd, hop worlds, try to hide for a little bit and get some more kills, make up for the loss. Like, very quickly, the money that you lost really doesn't matter. It is part of the balance here. I think that is everything I wanted to talk about when it comes to the Wildy boss update, everyone. Like I said early in the vid, I'll be making actual guides for each of these bosses. I'll pair up the bosses like Callisto and Arteo would be in the same guide, of course, but overall I plan on releasing a full guide for each of these 3 Wildy bosses. Let me know what you think of the Wildy boss update in the comments section below. If you've been enjoying the videos or you just got some useful information out of this one, be sure to like and subscribe for more content. I do stream on Twitch, which should be linked on the screen and in the description. I am also on Twitter and have a Discord, which are linked in the description. Thanks for watching, and best of luck on your Wildy boss grinds.